Thank you everyone for coming. I'm Dr. Sandra Chakosky, the middle school psychologist, and Leslie Fry is co-presenting with me, upper school psychologist. And we're so happy that you're here on an evening with us, joining Dr. Mitchell Greene for a discussion about sports psychology. Managing mind chatter is going to be the topic. And this event kicks off our Wellness Speaker Series, which is sponsored by the 55 and 65 Wellness Fund. So Dr. Greene is an adjunct instructor at Temple University's College of Public Health and a contributing columnist for USA Triathlon, and a sports psychology consultant to several athletic departments, endurance coaches, and national race series. So the breadth of Dr. Greene's clinical expertise and the energy and focus that he brings to his relationships with athletes, coaches, and teams makes Dr. Greene perfectly suited to advise and support his clients as they strive and help others to strive to reach their personal best. Dr. Greene's articles, book chapters, blogs, podcasts, workshops, and presentations have reached a wide audience from various sports, from basketball to squash, lacrosse, softball, tennis, football, figure skating, fencing, gymnastics, triathlons, track, and cross country.
So you might have seen Dr. Greene last year on our virtual event, or well, our students definitely did, along with two other speakers, and that was like the one time I feel like we had a majority of the upper school students engaged during a presentation in the morning through the day. So I personally am very, very thankful for him, and I'm glad that he was able to come back in person to be with all of you. Some other things to note: Dr. Greene is married with 3 children. He received his undergraduate degree in psychology and human resources management from Boston College, and his PhD in clinical psychology from Temple University. He also spent an additional fellowship year at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, specializing in family therapy. Dr. Greene is very active in endurance sports, such as marathon running, triathlons, and adventure racing. Thank you all for joining us this evening. We hope that you enjoy what's in store, and please save your questions and Q&As for me.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both.
So much.
Thank you, Leslie and Sandy. I will say, given that we're in a small, intimate group, I'm going to encourage we ask questions along the way. I think that will make it more dynamic, and I have a good sense of time. Like when you're a psychologist, you work on the hour, you kind of know, you have this sixth sense of how time passes, and so I'll worry about the time, but if you have a question, I'll try to answer it, or if it looks like it might be something best saved with the end, I'll encourage us to wait. So I'm happy to be here. I do know it takes a lot to get out on any night sometimes, particularly but during the work week, so I'm appreciative of everyone here and everyone who's going to be watching this maybe at home at some point. I've been practicing psychology and sports psychology for close to 20 years. I'm a clinical psychologist, as they said, so I have a PhD in clinical psych, but I specialize in sports psychology, which I'm biased, but I think is really the best combination because I'm ambidextrous, I'd like to say. If a client, a young person or a not so young person comes and talks to me and they want to talk about something that's off the field, a relationship issue, a personal issue, a mental health issue, I can field those and work with them. Or if they have something that's really more on the field, on the court that they're struggling with, I'm ready for that as well. And of course, like most people, it's a little bit of both. Sports psychology is really clinical psychology in many ways with like a sports overlay, right? How do you deal with disappointment? How do you deal with frustration? How do you deal with mistakes? How do you deal with not living up to expectations? How do you deal with issues of anger? Those are just sport type issues. Those are really personal type issues. So you could even think of it as clinical sports psychology is sort of the way, at least I practice it, the way I put those degrees together. I coined this term mind chatter years ago, and I'll define it in a couple of minutes. Partly because athletes would leave my office and I would mention this term mind chatter to them, and without me even telling them to remember it, they'd come back in like the next appointment and say, oh my God, my mind chatter was so terrible, like at the start of the game when I missed, my first shot. Or they'd be like, oh my God, my mind chatter went away after I scored, our team won or we scored a goal. So I was like, boy, this term really seems to stick with athletes. And so it's become a big part of what I do. and I've written an entire book about managing mind chatter, which I can talk a little bit more about at the end. But what's in the book is basically my approach, which you're going to get a good taste of, I hope tonight. Where I often start with young athletes of, let's say, the high school or middle school age, is I like to try to make a comparison between life in school and life out on the playing field or on the court. I'm just using tennis here. It could be lacrosse. It could be any sport there, but I kind of just let the tennis theme run through today's presentation, but just put your own sport in there. What I would often hear from my athletes is that they don't struggle with mind chatter. I know I haven't defined it yet. They don't struggle with it as much in school, generally speaking, as they do in sports. And there's a number of reasons for that. And I, right off the bat, when someone comes in and I hear that, I want to explain to them why that is. And I let them know that it makes total sense that they might have more chatter in athletics than they do in academics. Can any of you relate to that with your own kids? Is that true, that sports, or the kids you coach, sports gets them more turned up and twisted? It's not, of course, a universal thing, but it's a general, there's a lot of reasons why. So I'll go through with them, as I will with you, and say, okay, so in school, to be successful and to be a high achiever, obviously you need to be able to get yourself to school, get your homework done, review your study guide. If you're struggling in a class, ask questions from a peer or from your teacher. And then when it comes time to take the test, a person who's sort of hitting on all cylinders, generally speaking, will do pretty well. Will have a sense of how they're going to do. Unless the teacher's going to mess with them and ask these questions that's completely, something unexpected. A person who's kind of hit everything will generally feel like they have some sense of control over what the final result's going to be. I'm not saying they can predict exactly what they're going to get, but they probably have a sense to it. Or if they haven't done any of those things, they're really not sure that they're going to do well at all. But in sports, that's not necessarily the case. And a lot of kids and a lot of people don't necessarily appreciate it. Because the kids I work with, and probably the kids you know, and your own, or the kids you work with, are going to practice, they're doing the drills, they're doing extra drills. They maybe do extra stuff in the basement to improve their fitness. They might be watching tape. They might be talking to their coaches about what they can do to get better. Yet when it comes time to play the match or play the game or play in the tournament, there's a sense of out of controlness around the whole thing. And all they have is sort of a map as to how this is supposed to work, is that this sort of works in school. When I do everything I'm supposed to do, the results are supposed to kind of come the way I expect. But my job is to teach them that sports requires a totally different mindset, which we're going to talk about today. And part of the reason is there's just so much uncertainty. Even when you do all your things right, you still have no idea, barely an idea of what's going to happen. All right, if you're ranked number 1 and you're playing number 100 in a tennis match, you might have a good idea about how it's going to go. But the kids who come talk to me aren't the kids who struggle with that. It's the kids who are playing against levels of competition that are right around their level. They might be a little bit better, they might be a little bit worse by some standard. And it's in that context where the mind begins to chat, because the uncertainty about what the outcome is going to be has exploded. Does that make sense as a concept? So in other words, in sports, there's just less control. We all love to have control. And so I will explain to a young athlete, you've probably been using the wrong mindset. Here's the good news. The good news is no one's ever taught you how to handle this. And that's not just hyperbole. That's the truth, is we coach up kids in all the right ways for the most part, but no one's teaching them this stuff. And I really consider myself as much an instructor and a teacher as I am a psychologist. If you were in my office, you wouldn't see a whiteboard this size, but you would see a whiteboard the quarter of this size, where I'll spend a lot of time with an athlete, not necessarily just sitting across like a couch and a chair in a traditional clinical setting, We'll do that a little bit just to chat, but then we're out of our chairs and we're set up so they can see my whiteboard. And we're kind of mapping out. I'm teaching a little bit about some of the stuff that I'm teaching you about today. And part of it is, hey, here's the good news. No one's taught you this. Let me teach you how to manage the mental game of sport. And if you begin to adopt it, you'll find more success. At least that's what I hope. Okay, let's keep moving. So the idea is we need a plan for the uncertainty and for the lack of control that sports provides. That concept works for everyone? We get that? We're going to talk a lot about confidence later, because probably the number one reason people are coming to talk to me is they say they struggle with confidence. I used to be confident, now I'm not confident anymore. I can't find my confidence. I'm confident in this game and in this tournament, but I'm not confident at all here. That all makes sense to me, and I explain it to them so it makes sense to them. But of course, confidence is hard to find when the uncertainty is so big. So we're going to talk about a new approach that appreciates the lack of control and that the confidence is fleeting. A teaser is that confidence, in my way of looking at it, which is unlike a lot of the sports psychology you have read or will hear, I see confidence as overrated. I'm not against confidence. If an athlete's confident, I'm getting out, they don't need me. Right? People don't come talk to me when they're confident. And they don't really, when you have confidence, you're not asking questions about how should I manage this? You're just ready to roll. But what do you do? And a lot of us don't know what to do when we're not confident. Those are the people who come and talk to me. What do I do when I'm lacking in confidence? And as far as I'm concerned, positive affirmations, I know this is, could be controversial for you. Positive affirmations, just telling yourself, that you got it, I find generally doesn't really work so well, particularly for your athletes. So at your kids' levels, this is elite athletes, professional athletes that I work with around the country, around the globe that I'm on with, that could struggle with issues of confidence and chatter. You just have to go to the last Olympic Games to see some struggles from Michaela Schifrin and Simone Biles, right? Elite, next level athletes who could have bouts of doubts and chatter like anybody else under certain circumstances. How are we doing with that? Questions, comments, reactions? You're listening, you're intrigued. Okay, let's roll. Okay, so mind chatter, let me define it. And this is what I would do with somebody in my office. I'd write on the board, they would say, I'm having a lot of negative self-talk, I'm having a lot of doubts, I got like gremlins in my head. I go, okay, I call that mind chatter. Let's not worry. But we're all kind of sort of saying the same thing. I define mind chatter as when we start to have that conversation with ourselves that's full of doubt, second guessing, and negative thinking. Mind chatter is the conversation we have with ourselves when we're full of doubt, second guessing, and negative thinking. Mind chatter I teach, and I'll teach you as well, something you know, but I'll remind you of, isn't going to show up, let's say, on a typical Tuesday afternoon practice. Whatever a typical Tuesday afternoon practice is like. You're running drills, you're stretching, you're kind of putting the offense in, and the coach is explaining things. Generally speaking, although there are exceptions to this rule, there are plenty of them, an athlete is not bound to have as much mind chatter as they are when it's game day. Mind chatter is not going to show up if your son or daughter is watching Netflix at night tonight in their bed, just chilling out. Or they're at Cava with their friends having lunch, chatter isn't going to show up. So I go through a lot of examples when chatter doesn't show up. Chatter shows up like clockwork under two conditions. The conditions are when there's uncertainty and high stakes. So there's not a lot of uncertainty and high stakes. At Cava, okay, maybe you don't know what you're going to order, but the stakes aren't high. They don't know what's going to happen at the end of the Office episode, although they probably do because they've watched it 100 times. There's nothing at stake in those conditions. The Tuesday afternoon practice, similar. But boom, that Friday night tournament, or even sometimes days before the Friday night tournament, chatter will appear because the conditions have been met. We don't know what's going to happen, which we've talked about a little bit, and the stakes feel really big. How we doing now? I'm going to digress from sports for a minute to drill home the nature of chatter in life, not just in sports. Of course, when I brought this stuff before publishers, a lot of them said, "Why don't you just write a book about chatter? Because we all got chattered." Like, the publisher's like, "I got chatter all over the place," But I really wanted to write this about sports. But of course, it's about sports. So, a little silly example that I'll give kids, but it often works, is I say to them, if we were to go out to go on a hike, I was to meet you at your college or your high school, with your family, with your team, and we all went on a long 2-hour hike, and about halfway through, I said to you, "Look, I'm starving. Leslie, I'm starving. I got to eat something. These berries at this bush over here, they look really good. They look like strawberries. So Leslie, just wait with me a minute. I'm just going to chow down a couple of strawberries." And Leslie's on the hike with me. She goes, "Mitch, those look like strawberries. I've been on this hike before. They look like strawberries, but they're not, and I haven't seen anybody eat them before. So would you do me a favor? I'm not looking to pick you up off the ground on this hike. Why don't you leave them alone?" And of course I say, "Leslie, I think you're right." And I go ahead and I struggle and suffer even though I'm really hungry, and I don't eat the berries. Why? Because my chatter has shown up. If I was to eat them, I don't know what would happen. And the stakes, if they were toxic or deadly, needless to say, would be extremely high. My point is, in this example, thank goodness we have chatter. Thank goodness we have a mind that says, danger, warning, this could be bad for you. And that's the point. Our minds want to protect us. They want to protect your kids in sports from things going terribly wrong. So, chatter in and of itself isn't necessarily bad or good. I want my kids to understand that it is a mechanism there to protect us. In the case of the berries, protect us from our physical survival, from physically getting hurt. You with me? Now, what does it have to do with the tennis match on Friday night? Generally speaking, your athlete isn't worried about, they can be, of course, if they're coming back from injury, so there's some caveats to that, which we can talk about if you have an injured athlete, we can talk about that. But they're generally not worried about, life and death, literally their physical life and death. But chatter is still on high alert because the conditions of uncertainty and high stakes are at play. While it might look like a typical Friday night tennis match, for your kids, the stakes are through the roof. And you might say, it's just a Friday night match. You're just playing against GA. You've played them 2 months ago, and you won. But for them, the stakes often are through the roof because the chatter explodes the stakes for them. It's not just about winning and losing. I don't really remember what the next slide is. Oh, no, wait, there's a little thing here. Hold on. I was prepared. Yeah, hold that thought for a second. I'll leave it for a moment. The stakes are through the roof. I will write down on a big whiteboard and fill it when I say to them, so what's at stake? What's at stake at that match? It will often start with whether I win or lose, and then it could go to what they're going to wind up being ranked if they lose, or maybe if they win. Who will be disappointed in them if it doesn't go according to plan, including their parents, including their coaches. Probably the number one response is whether I'm going to meet expectations or not. Whether I'm going to meet expectations or not. In other words, I'm a decent player, I play number 2 on the ladder, I'm kind of expected to hold my own. And the chattery fear of not being able to hold your own is partly what's at stake. College scholarships, college recruitment, Most of the kids that I see are extremely competitive in their sports at any age, and or those who've already been recruited. Um, Disappointment, not meeting expectations, embarrassment. So what I'm saying here, guys, just to be clear, is I want my kids that I work with to know that chatter is going to show up because the conditions have been met. It's expected to show up. And I'm eventually going to get them to appreciate that we're going to actually plan for chatter to come. Because chatter's job is to protect us. In the case of the tennis match, it's not physical survival. It's like their psychological survival's at stake. Their reputation is at stake. Their ego is at stake. Their identity is at stake for the kids, at least that I see, whose lives are wrapped around their sport. So when we talk about why sports, unlike school, sometimes create so much more chatter, it's not just the uncertainty and lack of control. It's that I feel like everything about who I am is on the line. And who everybody expects me to be is on the line. How we doing? When I go through that list of what's at stake with the kids, they feel so gotten by me that I know right there they get that I get what they've been feeling. That's good therapy. That's good work. When they get that I get it, that I get that it's that there's a tennis match that needs to be played, but there's a game going on behind the scenes. The inner game of tennis is, how do I not screw this all up? Let's go to the next slide. The kinds of things that I'll hear is, if I don't start well, I won't finish well. I need to be more confident. The chatter is saying you need confidence. You need to make somebody proud this weekend. What happens if I don't prove myself and make the people proud who I need to make proud? I tend to hide out there. I was thinking about this is a professional lacrosse player I work with. Gets his stats at the beginning and then gets afraid that his stats are going to get screwed up in the second half of the game. Kind of hides. You wouldn't know it if you were watching. I mean, unless you were just only watching him. He's that high performing that people don't talk about it, but he knows it. He knows it. He shies away. His chatter says, what if? What if I screw this up? What if this goes wrong? What if my stats don't play out in the second half the way they would in the first half? What if I don't measure up? Is any of this a surprise to anybody? Or anybody want to make any comments about what I'm suggesting here? So I want my athletes to know that they don't have, it's not them that has a problem. I will say to them, you don't have a problem. Which is very powerful to hear from a psychologist. The problem is, though, that your chatter is on duty and goes on duty the second it knows the stakes are high, the uncertainty is at play, and all of a sudden, the mind will begin to pump out these messages of what could possibly go wrong. That future you is doomed. So then the athletes, tell me whether this is your experience, they come to me because they get out on the court and they start pushing the ball if it's tennis. Where they've been working all week in practice about their topspin and loading on their front foot. Or if it's a lacrosse player or a basketball player, they know they should be going to goal because that dodge is something they've been working on, but they're going to pass instead of shoot. When somebody passes them in a cross-country race, they're going to slow down instead of speed up because the chatter has already decided this is all not worth it because you're not winning, you're not a winner, you're kind of a loser idea. These are the kids that I talk to and that I see who have the elementary school team, but I still found a way to give them credit or get them credit for winning in their division and winning in their league. You'd be winning, but what would happen, they would be terribly bored. It wouldn't be worth it. You'd have no chatter, but it would suck. Nobody wants to do that. Or if the lacrosse game today against Haverford turned into turned into a kickball game. When they got there was no lacrosse, it was kickball. Those kids who were full of chatter would be like, oh, okay. And then after like an inning of kickball, they'd be like, this is stupid. I didn't get trained up to play kickball. I don't care about kickball. But anytime you're faced with a challenge where there's uncertainty and a lot of stakes, their chatter's going to show up. So I want them to know it's going to be there. We just have to learn how to manage it. So let's get to managing it. That's the meat. That's the meat. But the setup is key. The mistake that I see a lot of pop psychologists make and parents can make, understandably, is you go right to just sort of the strategies to manage it. I want the kids to understand why it's there. I want them to understand how predictable it is. It's like a movie script. You get to the game and you go, all right, I got it today. Your chatter goes, oh, remember you said that last week. And they say, no, seriously, this time I had a great week of practice. I was really confident. And the chatter goes, yeah, but what if you're really confident and you still blow it? You know, and they go, and then all of a sudden, your athlete is just dialoguing with their chatter, which is the exact opposite of what I want them to do. So what do I want them to do? I want them to make room for their chatter. I'm looking for them to have a completely different relationship with their doubts than they've ever had before. Normally, the idea is we can't have these doubts. These doubts are bad. If we have doubts, we're going to suck. We can't play well. I say, not true. Not necessarily true. Those of you who are dialed into sports and pay attention at the highest levels, because more and more top athletes are demonstrating this and saying this, they get full of doubts. They have second guessing. They have chatter. I was at the 2016 Olympic Games. You won't talk about high stakes when you've got USA across your chest. People are throwing up. I mean, these are the best athletes in the world. I'm talking to them. They're full of chatter, full of doubts. So instead of thinking that doubts aren't something that they should have, which I understand particularly young athletes think because they've heard so much, you need to be confident, you need to be confident. I'm looking for them to make room for it. So how do we do that? One way I do that, I'll tell a couple of stories, but I'll say to them, if I said to you, I want you to thank your chatter for sharing, what do you think that means? Let me ask it to you guys. If I say to somebody, thank your chatter for sharing, how does that hit you? Yeah.
Acceptance comes up, and also that your chatter isn't you.
Yeah. I use the word acknowledgement, but acceptance is okay. We won't quibble. Acknowledging that chatter has shown up. And I love the second point about that it's not you. I will say to them, you show up to the field, but you don't show up alone. You show up with your ideas about you want to do X, Y, and Z on the field today. Your chatter also shows up with its own agenda. Your agenda and chatter's agenda are wholly different. Your agenda is to figure out how to get open for a shot. Your agenda in tennis is to figure out how to get to the net more. I'll ask them a lot about the sports part of it. That's the fun part. You know, what's your strategy? What's your agenda? We'll talk about that in a minute. But I want them to know that chatter doesn't give a bleep about any of that. It's only interested in your possible demise. And chatter is only interested in the outcome of the match or the game or the tournament. So, will I make someone proud means what's the outcome going to be? Will I disappoint somebody means what are the results going to look like an hour from now? Will I meet expectations? Results. So here's Mr. or Miss Athlete, and at the start of the game, here's the end of the game, right? We all try to talk about being in the moment. I'm all for being in the moment, but this is why it's so hard to be in the moment. You want them to focus on the next point, the next step, etc., the next shot, but their chatter is already has them here thinking about the possible freaking circumstances that could ruin their Friday night because they're all supposed to go out after the game. And you know what? If I lose this and I suck, I'm not going to even want to go out, and no one's going to really want to even hang with me, and my weekend's going to stink. Their chatter is here. We want them to be here, but their chatter's here. So the point about you are not your chatter is you've got your agenda and chatter has its agenda. And we need to understand that it's going to take you out there. So when we thank it for sharing, we're like, along with the gentleman's comment, we're like acknowledging it. We're like, right, right. I appreciate that you're here and you're trying to protect me. But shoot, the game hasn't even started yet. I think I'm okay. I don't know if I need that kind of protection because I've got a game plan in mind, which we'll get to, because there is a step 2 to all this. Anyone else want to comment on the thanks for sharing piece or on anything that I just said? Sometimes we'll have the athletes say, I'm having the chattery thought that this isn't going to go well today, which is much better than saying, this isn't going to go well today. It creates some space and some distance. They love the fact, and I know you do too, when you start to get that it's not them that's mucking up the waters here. Having that chattery thought that it's not going to go well. And it gives you all of a sudden a little perspective to go, okay, wait a second. Here it comes. I will have kids write down on a Tuesday what their chat is going to say to them on that Friday. It's because it's scripted. They already know what it's going to say. What if she does better than me? What if I pull out of the race early? What if... So I'm giving you some of the highlights. There's, thanking it for sharing, acknowledging it, expecting it. We had one Olympic skier who gave her chatter a job to do, gave it a role. She told her, she came up with this. She told, which I now quote and use with other athletes. She told her chatter, when she gets so up the ski lift, you're like captured, right? You're stuck. You're just sitting there thinking about too many things. So the chatter would come up, and when she would get off the list, she would tell her chatter to wait over there and watch her do what she does. Sassy too, which I liked. She was sassy and it fit her personality. Again, it creates that it's not me. I'm the one who showed up for a reason here. I am not, right, like along the gentleman's coming, they're bigger. I want them to know they're bigger than their chatter. If all they were chatter, they would have quit by now. And we'll go through why they're there. You've probably heard psychologists in good faith talk to athletes, and I will too, about like, why are we still doing this? What is it about basketball? Why do you keep playing even though you're chattery and you wind up going 1 for 7, and your coach this and that? They love the game. They love the guys. They love the gals. They love the camaraderie. Eventually, I get them to see that they're part of the reason they're playing is because, and particularly the college athletes and beyond, that they're trying to discover how good they can be. That's the purpose behind it all. They really want to see how good they can be. And of course, the only way to see how good you can be is to match up against somebody else who's also good. But the chatter, again, doesn't care about any of that. Let's go to the next slide. So there's a mind chatter, there's you. In this way of talking, so this is a mindful approach. You hear a lot about mindfulness. I don't use the word mindfulness with them, not because I don't think this is a mindful approach. If you think about meditation, meditation isn't about getting rid of thoughts and sticking with the good ones. Meditation is all about noticing and observing. Oh, I'm having a thought. Oh, look, I'm drifting over here. Okay, how can I get myself back to center? Well, I'm drifting over here. So will I encourage meditation with some kids? Yes. But there are some issues that you can't breathe your way out of. Maybe this with some breath work, to me, might be the best solution. It's a mindful, acceptance-based approach, that any thought you have is legitimate. Not that there are good thoughts and bad thoughts, in the way I talk to my athletes. Questions, comments, reactions, issues, concerns, or crises? Anything? So the kids feel gotten. because I'm not just telling them to just think positive, I'm looking for them to make room for it. But there is a next step. There is a next step. The next step involves knowing where to put your attention. It's obvious we don't want to be putting our attention on what the chatter and just sitting there in a battle with our chatter. And then making room for it does try to create some space between them and their chatter. But now I need them focused. More important than a confident athlete is a focused one. One that knows where their attention needs to be and can stay locked in on it. So in the next slide, I think, I talk to them next about what their goals are for that tournament, game, match. Some of them have no idea. Some of them just start off with, I just want to play well. Right? Well, hoping to play well is not a good goal. I mean, it's admirable, but I would hope they would want to play well. And I would hope that they would want to win. But all the things that they and their chatter might be focused on, like the outcome and the results, are things that they can't directly control. You can't control directly whether you're going to win a tennis match or not. If you could, you'd never lose. You can't control whether you score 3 goals in a lacrosse game and get an assist. If you could, you'd always just do that, because why not? But that's not how sports works. So focusing on the outcome is doubly bad in that you can't directly control it, and you're just feeding your chatter, which again is only interested in what the outcome of the game is. You've heard the cliches, controlling the controllables, focusing on the things you can control. That's the direction I'm trying to work on with them. The way I get there is by trying to get them to talk about practice. This is where the sports part of me, I'm a big sports geek, and so I can dig in, I played all these sports. Let's talk about the game. Let's talk about, so where do you want to focus? Well, I want to get all my forehands in. Okay, that's an outcome. I mean, that's good, you want to get them in. I would hope you'd want to get them in. But if that's your goal, that's not going far enough, because you're focused just on the result. What are the things that go into getting the forehand in? Well, maybe it has to do with my footwork. Maybe my coach keeps telling me I got to load on my front foot. What would he or she be saying about what you need to be doing on your forehand, for example? And what that small goal would be, maybe about footwork or loading or follow through, we'll come up with just a few words, sometimes a single word. And get them to see, because we can't control the outcome of the game, and no one can, because chatter is going to run you ragged, now it's time to sort of try to dial in on just a few things that you could control, that you could direct, and let's go all in on those. A mistake that often happens is people focus on goal setting before they've done the work about managing the chatter. So people go, goal setting is bullshit, but it is bullshit if you have not figured out a way to clear the mind so you can focus. So someone said, like, I tried to set goals, but they didn't work. Of course they didn't work, because the mind isn't interested in your goals. It's interested in the possible disaster that could happen when you embarrass yourself in front of the home crowd. So we've made room, and now we've kind of created a funnel to try to get them to see that a win in the next game would be how close can they get, not perfect, to nailing those small action goals. And we come up with those together. I don't tell them what it is. I ask them lots of questions. I'm at my whiteboard. We erase. I go, that doesn't sound good. What about this one? Yeah, and sometimes they're out of their chairs demonstrating it for me so I can see what it looks like. I want to be able to see it. I don't want it to just be an idea. I want it to be an action. Something that has to do with the playing of the sport. Chatter is not interested in the sport. Chatter is interested in protection. From the berry bush to everything else, it's only interested in protecting us. So athletes, I want them to see that they can get better, faster. I mean, the biggest compliment I got was from the Olympian who said, every time we talk, I get faster. The idea is you don't need to be on a track or running to get good, because he recognized the mental piece was the missing switch for him. All of this takes a course of 3-4-ish sessions. 5, I got them to go. I want them to come back and try it out. I want them to see what it felt like, what worked, what didn't work, what clicked, what didn't click. Let's keep going. So in this context, as I said at the beginning, I'm not interested in them being confident. I don't really care if they're confident. I mean, if they are, great, but then they don't need me anymore, and that's good. To me, more powerful than confidence is courage. Because you cannot be courageous, by definition, except in the presence of doubt and fear. Fear always precedes courageous action. So the big reframe as well is now we're looking at the chatter and all that it has to throw in your face as an opportunity for you to be courageous. We'll talk a lot about courage. We'll talk about people in their lives that maybe they see as courageous. You know, Aunt Mary or Uncle Joe or their sister or their dog who's hanging on for dear life and seems to live another day. Talk about courage in the face of fear and doubt. People who climb Mount Everest aren't confident it's going to all work out. In fact, if they were confident climbing Everest, they'd find another mountain to climb. They're not looking for confidence. They're looking to get outside of confidence, into the danger zone, where the thrill of it all is. But we would say those people are utterly courageous because a change of the winds, that could be the end of them. Martin Luther King, I can't speak to this directly, but I'm sure wasn't always confident that his message was going to be received the way he intended it to be. But a man, I think we would all agree, of great courage, willing to say what needed to be said, no matter what other people might have said to him, and courage, not confidence. Confidence is something you get when you don't need it anymore. Courage is what I want these kids to be thinking about. And it goes a long way with them when they hear the message that they don't need to be confident to play well. There's often that just association, just because they felt confident all week. Remember the Tuesday practice and the Thursday one where they beat so-and-so? So they think that's how I'm supposed to feel, understandably. But they don't feel that way for all the reasons we've articulated today. And I go, of course you don't feel that way. Because the mind, because you care about the sport, your identity's wrapped in the sport, and all the chatter that we talked about today is up to. Capisce? Are we with me? Let me stop. That's kind of a ABC 1, 2, 3 of my acceptance-based approach to managing the doubts, the second guessing, and negative thinking that is part of the competition picture. Regrettably, for youth, more and more, for all the reasons you probably know. The younger they start, the more competitive they are, the amount of games they play, the parents who identify being a good parent with their association with their kids' success. I'm the father of 3 daughters, one's still in college, the other 2 are out, a college athlete myself. I lived and breathed this stuff myself. I had to check myself at the door as well when my kids were competing. My daughter in college now is a dancer. It's like the most wonderful thing to go up there. It's just dancing. There's no judges. There's no ratings. There's just expression. Whereas with my other ones in their competitive days, right? As a parent, I had to get my mind clear as well about what this was for, what this was about, what I could offer them. And often I found that it's really saying less and less was about what was needed from me. Not because I'm a sports psychologist, but because I'm, in their minds, I'm far from a sports psychologist. I'm just dead, right? So a lot of it was less and less. Because what you say to your kids as they walk out the door to play basically goes in mostly one ear and out the other. It's not really hinging on that. So be careful, about what you say to them in those moments. it's not that your advice might not be good advice. It's just that their chatter starts to think about, what if I don't do it? You know, I tell coaches out there to sort of say, you got this one, or you definitely should beat her, or there's no way you could lose to him, or you're ranked higher, so I don't think this should be a hard match. It's outcome-related advice and commentary that will wind up feeding the chatter for the chattery type of kid. Not for everybody. That's not across the board. And because I'm not talking about an across-the-board kid. I'm talking about the kids who tend to struggle because of the chatter. There's some kids who say, go kick their butt, and they're like, right now, let's go. And there are other kids who go, what if I don't? What if I can't? What if it doesn't work out that way? The car ride home, we're just talking about parent stuff. You can't escape when you're in a car. Your kids can't escape. It's too much of a closed space. So as much as you might want to say something in the car, I encourage you to only speak about the game if they bring it up and want to talk about it. Otherwise, what happened in the second quarter, or what happened in the third period, obviously, particularly if it didn't go well, is probably left when there's space for people to move and breathe. It's their sport, not yours. So let them, if it's on their minds, they might be already moved on to dinner or what they're going to do later. So let's not give them the message that this has to be the most important thing that they have to discuss with you in that moment. This is true around the dinner table as well. You don't have to talk about the game or the upcoming tournament unless they're into it and it feels good and organic. But you predicting how it's going to go in the game, and you know they're playing number 23 is the person you're going to be covering, like, enough. Find something else to talk about. The last thing, and then we'll do questions, is you also don't have to go to every game. Am I saying you shouldn't go? No. Am I saying if your kids want you there, should you go? Sure. Don't be so obligated, though. You're allowed to not go. I write fake prescriptions sometimes for parents, those that I really don't want them to necessarily go, to go get Starbucks, because part of it is then sometimes you know more than you need to know about. And so when they get back in the car, you don't know what happened in the second quarter because you weren't there. Sometimes that's good. If they want to talk about what happened in the second quarter, fine. But sometimes you know too much. We already know too much about our kids sometimes. And I encourage you to not feel obligated. Even if your kid wants you to go, you can say, you know what, I'm busy, or I can't make it. Like, I think there's something healthy about letting when they're at the age and the stage, to be able to drop them off and get rides and kind of be a little dispassionate about the whole ball game. Does that mean you shouldn't go? No. Does that mean you shouldn't cheer them on? Of course I'm saying, do what you feel is necessary, but keep an eye out. Keep an eye out for even to talk to your kid about what would happen if I didn't show up. I know you'd miss it, but maybe it's good for them. Maybe it's good for them. Okay. Thank you all for your attention and for your listening.